The forest was different that morning. Samuel had lived by the river for more than 70 years, and in that time he had learned the language of the land. He could tell when a hawk circled above from the sudden hush of sparrows. He could read the river's mood by the way its surface broke against the rocks. But that morning, something was missing. The forest was still. Not peaceful, but holding its breath. Then he heard it. A sound that did not belong. Thin. Trembling. Neither bird call nor wind. It was a cry, faint but desperate, the kind that pierces the heart before the mind even knows what it is. Samuel followed, his boots crunching over damp leaves, his cane tapping against stones. The storm from the night before had left the ground littered with branches, some snapped like bones. Ahead, a pine had fallen, its massive trunk split and splintered by lightning. Beneath it, in a hollow of broken branches, 3 small shapes quivered. They were bear cubs. Their fur was matted with rain, their paws scraped raw from the struggle. Their mother was nowhere in sight. Samuel froze. Every instinct told him to back away. A mother bear could tear him apart if she were near. But minutes passed. Then an hour. The forest gave no sign of her return. The cubs' cries grew weaker. Their tiny bodies trembled with hunger and cold. Samuel's chest ached. He thought of his late wife, Margaret, who always said his heart was too soft for a hunter. He knelt slowly, ignoring the sting in his knees, and touched the smallest cub. Its body was light, too light. "I can't leave you here," he whispered. His voice shook as if saying it sealed his fate. One by one, he lifted them, cradling their fragile forms in his old fishing coat. The cubs whimpered, then grew quiet, pressing into the warmth of his chest as though they already understood. Samuel turned back toward his cabin by the river, carrying not just 3 orphans, but the beginning of a story no one would believe. What would you have done if you were Samuel, walked away, or carried those cubs into your home? Samuel's cabin by the river was never meant for company, let alone 3 restless bear cubs. The place smelled of cedarwood and tobacco, with old fishing nets hanging from the rafters and a single iron stove that kept out the cold. Now it echoed with whines, squeaks, and the soft thump of paws on the wooden floor. At first, survival was all that mattered. Samuel warmed goat's milk and fed the cubs from bottles, one after the other, until their bellies swelled and they collapsed into a heap of fur at his feet. Nights were restless. The cubs woke crying, searching for the mother they had lost. Samuel, who had long grown used to silence, found himself whispering lullabies he hadn't sung since Margaret was alive. "They don't understand your words," he told himself once. But deep down, he knew comfort was a language of its own. Days turned into weeks. The cubs began to stumble across the cabin, knocking over jars, tugging at his boots, even climbing onto his bed as though it were their mountain. Samuel laughed more than he had in years, a laugh that startled him at first, as if it belonged to a younger man. But the villagers whispered. "Bears are not pets, Samuel," one warned. "They'll turn on you when they're grown." He nodded but did not answer. Each morning, he led the cubs to the riverbank, watching them splash clumsily at the water, learning the instincts their mother never got to teach. He caught fish for them, laying them out on flat rocks, teaching them to swipe with their paws. They were slow learners, but they tried, and Samuel's patience never wavered. Sometimes, late at night, he sat by the fire and wondered, am I saving them, or keeping them from what they were meant to be? Still, when the cubs curled beside him, breathing in rhythm with his own, Samuel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He wasn't just raising wild creatures. In some quiet way, they were raising him too. Do you believe animals can feel love as deeply as we do? Or is it just survival? The seasons shifted, as they always did by the river. Spring's rush softened into the golden hush of summer, then gave way to the crisp bite of autumn. The cubs had grown, their bodies leaner, stronger. No longer clumsy balls of fur, they could climb trees with ease and wrestle each other until the ground shook with their playful growls. Samuel watched with pride, but also with dread. He knew the wild was calling. It began subtly, the cubs sniffing the wind longer than usual, pausing at the tree-line as if listening for voices only they could hear. At night, they grew restless, pacing by the cabin door, their dark eyes shining with something Samuel recognized but could not hold back, instinct. One morning, it happened. He set out fish on the rocks as he always did, expecting the playful scramble that followed. But this time, the cubs hesitated. They looked at him, then toward the forest. Their muscles tensed, their paws shifting as though the earth itself tugged them away. Samuel's throat tightened. He knew better than to stop them. Bears did not belong in cabins, no matter how much love had been given. Still, letting go felt like tearing out a piece of his own soul. Kneeling by the river, he spoke softly, voice breaking. "Go on then. Don't forget the river. Don't forget the old man who tried." One by one, the cubs nuzzled against him. Their fur was warm, smelling faintly of smoke and pine. Then, with hesitant steps, they disappeared into the forest's embrace. Samuel stood alone, listening to the silence they left behind. 4 days after, he placed fish on the rocks, waiting, hoping. The fish rotted, untouched. The river flowed on. He told himself it was right, that they were free where they belonged. Yet each evening, as the sun dipped and shadows lengthened, Samuel sat by the door, his heart aching with a question he could not silence. Would they ever remember him? If you raised them, would you have let them go, or tried to keep them by your side? Years passed. Samuel's hair, once only streaked with silver, had turned fully white. His hands shook when he tied his fishing lines, and his steps grew slower along the banks of the river. The cabin, weathered by time and storms, leaned a little more each year. Yet he remained, for the river was all he had left. The cubs, he believed, were gone forever. Sometimes he dreamed of them, their tiny cries, their warm weight in his arms, the day they vanished into the trees. He would wake with tears on his cheeks, ashamed of how much he still missed them. "They've forgotten you, old man," he muttered to himself. "That's what wild things do." But the forest had not forgotten. It happened on an ordinary evening. Samuel was cleaning his nets by the river when the woods behind him stirred. A low rumbling sound rolled through the trees, not threatening but familiar. He turned, heart hammering. 3 shapes emerged from the shadows. Massive. Muscular. Their coats gleamed with the sheen of adulthood, eyes sharp with the wild. Bears, full-grown, majestic, dangerous. Samuel froze, cane trembling in his hand. He should have been afraid. But then one of them stepped forward, lowering its massive head. It sniffed the air, and let out a deep guttural chuff. Samuel knew that sound. He had heard it once, long ago, when the cub was still small enough to fit in his coat. His eyes blurred with tears. "You came back," he whispered. The bears did not attack. Instead, they moved closer, circling him with a strange gentleness, as though remembering. One brushed its head against his shoulder, careful despite its size. Another sat by the riverbank, exactly where it had once learned to fish. Samuel laughed, a broken sound carried away by the wind. Against all odds, the bond had endured. The cubs he saved had returned, not as orphans, but as guardians. Do you think animals truly remember kindness, even years later? The summer had been dry. Too dry. The river ran lower than Samuel had ever seen, its banks cracked and thirsty. The forest smelled of dust instead of pine. Every villager knew what that meant. One spark, one lightning strike, and the whole valley could turn into an inferno. The night it happened, Samuel was asleep in his chair by the fire. He woke to a sound like thunder, but sharper, the violent crack of burning wood. Smoke clawed at his throat before he even opened the door. The forest was ablaze. Flames leapt from tree to tree, devouring the canopy in waves of orange. Sparks rained down like fiery snow. Samuel coughed, stumbling into the night, his eyes stinging. The air was alive with chaos, shrieks of fleeing animals, the crash of trees collapsing into the fire's maw. His cabin groaned under the heat. The roof smoldered, then ignited, collapsing in a shower of embers. Samuel staggered back, the cane slipping from his sweaty palms. His legs failed him. For the first time, he felt the cold certainty of death. And then, a roar split the night. From the wall of smoke, 3 massive shapes emerged. The bears. His bears. They moved with purpose, not panic. One shoved against him, forcing him upright. Another blocked the path of falling branches with its sheer bulk, embers sparking against its thick fur. The third pressed against Samuel's back, urging him forward. Step by step, they drove him through the choking smoke, guiding him down a narrow game trail only they seemed to know. Samuel's body burned with exhaustion, but the bears would not let him fall. At last, the forest opened to the river. Samuel collapsed at the water's edge, gasping. Behind him, flames raged, devouring everything he had ever built. His cabin, his nets, his memories, gone. But not his life. Through blurred vision, he saw the three bears standing between him and the fire, their silhouettes glowing against the inferno. For a moment, they looked less like animals and more like guardians, sentinels of the bond he thought was forgotten. Samuel wept, whispering into the smoke. You remembered. Have you ever felt saved by something, or someone, you once helped long ago? The fire consumed much of the valley that summer. When the smoke cleared, the villagers returned to find blackened stumps where proud pines had stood, and ash drifting like snow across the river's surface. Samuel's cabin was gone, only a circle of charred stones marked where it had been. But Samuel was alive. The villagers found him sitting by the riverbank, leaning on his cane, his clothes singed but his eyes alight with a strange quiet peace. When they asked how he had survived, he only said, "The forest took everything, but it also gave back." Few believed the rest of his story. Bears rescuing a man from fire? To some, it sounded like the ramblings of an old hermit, dazed by smoke. But those who lived nearby began to notice things. On moonlit nights, three great shapes could be seen on the far side of the river, their silhouettes watching the cabin's ruins. By day, fishermen found claw marks in the soft earth near Samuel's path, always fresh, as though giants had walked there before him. The bears had not left. They lingered in the shadows, never approaching the village, never threatening. Yet Samuel felt them, a presence in the trees, a low chuff in the distance when he wandered too far, the comforting sense that he was never truly alone. Seasons turned again. Samuel grew weaker, his steps slower, his breath shorter. And when at last he did not come to the river one morning, the villagers searched. They found him in his chair, eyes closed, hands folded, as though he had simply drifted into another dream. That night, three roars shook the valley. The villagers swore they heard them echo for miles, carrying through the mountains like a funeral song. And for many nights after, the bears were seen keeping vigil by the riverbank where Samuel had once fed them fish. The old man was gone. But the bond remained, carved into the memory of the wild. Do you believe love can outlive us, carried not just by people, but by the animals we touch?